Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know it's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on. All right, you're tuning in because you want to be in the know, right? You want the lowdown without drowning in data. We get it. That's the whole deal here. Cutting through the noise, finding those surprising nuggets, the stuff that makes you go, huh, but doesn't make your head spin.
Exactly. And today we've got a real tangled web to untangle for you.
Yeah.
What's the latest with Trump's tariffs, the absolutely heartbreaking situation in Ukraine, and, you know, the ever-present question of China's role in both?
Yeah.
We've sifted through a bunch of sources reports from ITSA, market reactions to all this tariff talk, updates on the ground in Ukraine, and a Radio Free Asia piece on China's alleged direct support for Russia. So buckle up, because we're diving deep to bring you some clarity.
Okay, tariffs. It's like this never-ending drama, right?
Tell me about it.
1 minute the tension's sky high, the next there's a hint of a truce. So spill the tea. What's latest with the Trump camp on tariffs?
Well, the recent buzz suggests a definite shift. He's been indicating he's open to negotiating trade with China and other nations, which is a pretty significant change from his previously very, very firm stance.
And the market, man, it was like someone finally said pizza's here. The Dow shot up back over that 40,000 mark, which, you know, that's a big psychological win for investors, like finally hitting your step goal.
Totally. And the S&P and NASDAQ were right behind it, plus that semiconductor index.
Yeah.
Wow, it went through the roof.
Yeah.
It's like the market was just waiting for a little glimmer of hope.
That's a great analogy.
The market definitely reacted with a strong sense of relief. We saw those major indices posting significant gains. And the tech sector, especially the big names like NVIDIA, Meta, Tesla, Amazon, Microsoft.
All the usual suspects.
They really led that charge. That surge in the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index is particularly telling because those companies are so, you know, heavily invested in trade with China and rely on global supply chains.
It's wild how fast the mood can change. Because it wasn't that long ago, after that April 2nd talk about a possible 145% tariff on Chinese stuff.
Oh, yeah.
The market kind of went into a mini panic attack, right?
Exactly. That announcement triggered a noticeable downturn. The S&P 500, the Dow, the NASDAQ all saw declines. So this recent jump is largely fueled by renewed optimism that the U.S. and China might actually, maybe, sit down and hash things out.
And there's always a but hanging around, isn't there?
Always.
What's China saying about all this negotiation chatter? Are they as excited as Trump seems to be all of a sudden?
According to the reports, not so much. China's official line has been pretty low-key. They've stated that there are no formal negotiations happening right now.
Oh, okay.
Which creates a real contrast with the more upbeat news coming from the U.S. side and throws a bit of a wet blanket on all the enthusiasm.
Yeah, that dampens things a bit.
It suggests they might be waiting to see more concrete policy shifts from the U.S. or, you know, simply maintaining flexibility in their approach.
It does sound a bit like Trump's classic negotiation playbook, though, doesn't it?
Maybe, yeah.
Remember him mentioning that 145% tariff was too high, but then suggesting he'd lower it, but not to zero to get a fair deal.
Right, right.
It's like he's showing his hand a little, seeing what he can get away with.
That's a fair way to look at it. It does appear he's trying to find a balance, using the threat of those high tariffs as leverage, while also indicating he might be willing to compromise.
But
the muted response from China so far suggests that this tactic hasn't quite achieved its intended goal yet. Anyway.
And then we hear whispers about him maybe even considering dropping those tariffs further down to the 50% to 65% range. That sent the markets into another little party, didn't it? Stocks, currencies, bonds, all perked up.
Yes, those reports from April 23rd about potential tariff reductions did further ease market anxieties and sparked another rally. The Dow's climb of over 400 points and the continued strong performance of the semiconductor index really reflect that increased optimism.
But should we actually be popping the champagne? Are the experts buying into this, or are they still a bit side-eyeing the whole situation?
There's definitely a degree of caution among Wall Street analysts. Folks like Morgan Stanley's Michael Gapin are warning that even if there are delays in implementing tariffs, the fundamental uncertainty of the tariff policy could still be a long-term drag on the U.S. economy. He made the point that U.S. real tariff rates are already at historically high levels.
Wow. Okay.
So even with a temporary positive blip, the bigger picture remains, somewhat uncertain.
So even if we get a temporary good vibe, the underlying issues are still hanging around.
Precisely. And some analysts speculate that China might be playing a longer game here, maybe adopting what's being called a protracted war strategy.
A protracted war strategy? What does that mean?
The idea is they wait for economic pressures within the U.S. to build up, hoping that will force Trump to make more significant concessions down the line.
Oh, okay.
Why rush if time might give you a better hand?
That makes sense. Play the long game. What about what people are actually saying about all this? I always scroll through platforms like X to get a sense of the public mood.
Yeah, as you might imagine, is quite divided.
Shocker.
Right. Some users see these shifts in tariff talk as nothing more than market manipulation designed to create short-term gains. Others are deeply skeptical that any real progress in negotiations will happen given China's continued reserved stance.
So what's the real takeaway for the markets right now? What should people be paying attention to?
The big one is whether actual formal negotiations between the U.S. and China get underway. That's key.
Right.
Trump himself said on April 23rd that if no agreement is reached within the next couple of weeks, he's ready to slack those maximum 50% reciprocal tariffs back on China and other countries.
Reciprocal meaning?
Meaning tariffs that each country imposes on the other's goods. Tit for tat.
Gotcha.
That threat of renewed high tariffs could very easily send the markets into another spin.
And we talked about how sensitive the tech and semiconductor industries are to all this. It's like they're on a constant roller coaster with every tariff headline, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Companies like TSMC and NVIDIA are directly in the crosshairs of these policies. The recent jump in the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index shows how relieved the market is when tensions seem to ease.
Yeah.
But that relief could be very temporary if these talks don't pan out.
It feels a bit like déjà vu, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't we see a similar market reaction back in April when there was talk of pushing back some tariffs and ramping up others?
Yes, good memory. On April 9th, when Trump announced a delay in tariffs on 75 countries and a significant increase on China, we did see a substantial single-day market jump.
But it didn't last.
Exactly. As you pointed out, that rally didn't last because the underlying uncertainty remained. It fizzled out.
Okay, so to sum up the tariff saga for now, the market got a little boost because Trump sounded like he might be willing to talk, but China's not confirming any talks, which is a bit of a red flag.
Definitely a red flag.
And even with the recent gains, we haven't fully bounced back from the initial tariff worries, so it all hinges on whether these negotiations actually happen. And if they don't, those big tariffs could come back with a vengeance. Did I get all that?
You nailed it. Keeping an eye on official statements from both sides and tracking market sentiment will be crucial to see what the next chapter holds.
All right, let's shift focus now to the absolutely grim situation in Ukraine. It feels like the conflict just continues with such devastating consequences, and the reports of recent attacks are just heartbreaking.
Indeed. The recent military actions paint a truly horrific picture. We've seen a series of intense Russian attacks, including those missile strikes on Kyiv and Kharkiv on April 23rd,
Oh, yeah.
which tragically caused so many deaths and injuries. The earlier missile strike on Sumy was also incredibly devastating. Over 35 killed, over 100 injured. And then that drone attack on a worker's bus in Marhanets just adds to the terrible human toll of this war.
Just awful.
It's also a sobering thought that the Kyiv and Kharkiv attacks happened shortly after Trump's public criticism of Zelensky.
Right, the timing, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just Ukraine that's being hit, right? There are also those mysterious explosions inside Russia itself.
That's correct. The reports mentioned unexplained explosions in Moscow's central business district on April 24th and a significant explosion at a military depot in the Vladimir region, which actually led to a state of emergency being declared there.
Wow.
These incidents definitely add another layer of tension and uncertainty to the overall situation.
On the other side, Ukraine has been showing it can still push back with those drone attacks on Moscow and continuing to hold on to some areas in Russia.
Yes. Ukraine has demonstrated its ability to conduct counterattacks, like that large-scale drone attack on Moscow on April 15th, which reportedly damaged several power facilities. Their continued presence in parts of Russia's Kursk region also highlights their resilience. Plus, their efforts to target Russia's shadow oil tanker fleet show their determination to disrupt Russia's economic resources.
Now, amidst all this, there's been a push for a ceasefire, particularly from the U.S. side. But it doesn't sound like it's going very well.
That's a major sticking point. The Trump administration has been actively trying to broker a ceasefire, even proposing a framework that would essentially unofficially recognize Russia's control over Crimea and those eastern Ukrainian regions they've occupied since 2022.
Whoa. And Zelensky
strongly rejected it, which is completely understandable given Ukraine's firm stance on its territorial integrity. He's not ceding territory.
No way. So the U.S. is putting a proposal on the table, but Ukraine is saying no way. And what's Russia's take on all this?
Well, the U.S. kind of threw down an ultimatum, with Vice President Vance saying they'd walk if the proposal wasn't accepted, and Secretary Rubio warned they might abandon mediation.
So high pressure.
Very high pressure. Rubio even canceled the London peace talks scheduled for the 24th, acknowledging agreement was unlikely this week. Though Trump sounded optimistic on Truth Social, but vaguely.
Of course. What about Russia?
Russia, through Putin, has also put forward proposals. There was that 30-hour Easter truce, though, both sides accused each other of breaking it almost immediately. More significantly, Putin has publicly stated he's open to direct talks with Ukraine, but, and it's a big but, only if Ukraine gives up Crimea and those 4 eastern regions AND agrees not to join NATO or the EU.
Which are clearly non-starters for Ukraine.
Exactly. Total non-starters. It feels like we're at a real impasse.
It sounds like a stalemate. Everyone's talking or trying to talk, but nobody's really budging on the core issues. What role are the Europeans playing in trying to find a way forward?
European nations, especially the UK, have been involved in diplomatic efforts. Those London peace talks you mentioned, hosted by the UK Foreign Secretary, brought together officials from the US, Ukraine, and Europe to discuss potential ceasefire frameworks. However, there are clear concerns among European allies about what they perceive as a potentially pro-Russian leaning from the Trump administration.
Yeah, I bet.
The EU foreign policy chief, Kallas, also expressed skepticism about Russia's motives, suggesting they might be using talk of ceasefires as a way to stall to buy time. She didn't think the U.S. had used all its leverage on Russia yet.
Interesting. Okay, now let's get to the really sensitive issue of China's involvement. The reports we have paint a pretty worrying picture, especially regarding support for Russia.
Yes, this is a critical element of the whole situation, and it's getting more complex. Ukraine has made some serious accusations, including claims that hundreds of Chinese citizens are fighting as mercenaries for Russia.
Wow, mercenaries.
Yes, and that Chinese military officers are on the ground acting as observers, gathering battlefield intelligence. Kyiv even summoned the Chinese ambassador to express their serious concern over these reports.
And then there was that whole situation with the captured Chinese mercenaries, which sounds like it could have some pretty significant diplomatic repercussions.
It certainly has created tension. Ukraine's public display of these captured individuals on April 14th was controversial and potentially a violation of international humanitarian law. For their part, China has consistently stated its official neutral stance and denies any official involvement in the conflict on Russia's side.
But the reports we have suggest it goes beyond just individual mercenaries, hinting at more systematic support from China to Russia's war efforts.
That's the key point. U.S. intelligence assessments, as reported by Bloomberg back on April 6th, indicate that China has increased its support for Russia,
how so?
Including providing geospatial intelligence, or GOINT, for military purposes.
GOINT. Remind me what that is again?
So GOINT uses data from satellites, sensors, ground stations, aircraft images, all that stuff, to create highly detailed real-time maps and simulations, which are incredibly valuable for identifying military threats and planning operations. It's like having a constantly updated, super detailed Google map specifically for the battlefield.
Got it. That sounds incredibly useful. Or dangerous, depending on who has it.
Precisely. And it's not just intelligence sharing, is it? There are also reports about China and Russia working together on technologies that could have military uses.
Like what kind of tech?
Absolutely. A report from the UK's Royal United Services Institute RUSI, that's a defense and security think tank, highlighted the potential military implications of China-Russia cooperation in civilian 5G and satellite technologies.
5G and satellites.
Yeah. For a military like Russia's in Ukraine, which relies heavily on drones and communication equipment, having stable communication and accurate geospatial information is absolutely vital.
Makes sense.
The 5G cooperation agreements between Huawei and major Russian telecom companies, some going back to 2014, are particularly noteworthy because advancements in civilian 5G technology
Could be adapted for military use.
Exactly. Offering advantages like faster data transfer, precise tracking, real-time processing, more secure communication on the battlefield.
And satellite technology, I can only imagine how crucial that is for modern warfare.
It's indispensable. Satellite tech provides a whole range of critical services, from surveillance and reconnaissance, basically, keeping an eye on what the enemy is doing, to navigation, positioning, early warning systems for missile launches, even communication in remote areas.
Right.
The efforts by China and Russia since 2014 to make their GLONASS and Beidou satellite systems more compatible.
Their GPS equivalents.
Right. Including agreements back in 2022 to set up ground stations in each other's countries, really underscore their growing collaboration in this strategically important area.
But maybe the most direct form of help is just the sheer amount of Chinese-made goods with military applications that have been flowing into Russia since the invasion started.
That's a very significant point. According to the Atlantic Council, the surge in these Chinese exports has been crucial for Russia's ability to bolster its defenses and conduct counteroffensives in Ukraine.
And we're talking about
Things like excavators and bulldozers.
for digging trenches and stuff.
Exactly. Potentially used to build defensive fortifications. Think of those Surovikin lines we've heard about. Exports of those more than doubled or tripled in periods compared to before the war. And a massive increase in drone shipments. Russia has reportedly acquired many, many times more Chinese-made drones than Ukraine. We're talking over $100 million worth in just the first 7 months of 2023.
That's staggering.
Some were even marked for special military operation use. And even DJI, despite saying they suspended Russian operations, their stuff is still getting to entities linked to Russia's military, sometimes through Central Asian countries.
And the specifics are pretty eye-opening, aren't they? Beyond drones and diggers.
Yeah, like tank and fighter jet parts. That sounds like pretty direct military assistance, even if it's not whole weapon systems.
How do we know that?
Well, the data on ball-bearing exports, critical for tanks, shows huge increases, like 345% to Russia. And, interestingly, an even bigger jump, like nearly 2,500%, to Kyrgyzstan.
Suggesting re-export.
Exactly. That suggests they might be getting re-exported to Russia, and Russia's tank production has doubled post-invasion. Plus, U.S. intelligence indicates China is providing militarily usable high-tech components, avionics, jamming tech, fighter jet engine parts.
Avionics. Like the electronics for planes.
Right. And then there's heavy trucks and tractors, crucial for logistics. China's heavy truck exports to Russia are up 345%. Tractor exports went from basically zero to nearly 50,000.
Just massive numbers.
Huge logistical support.
And even down to the microchips, it sounds like China has become a really important supplier for Russia's defense industry, especially with sanctions biting.
That's a very accurate assessment. With international sanctions limiting Russia's access to advanced microelectronics, China has stepped in to fill that gap. U.S. officials have stated that a large percentage, around 90% in 2023, of Russia's microelectronics now come from China.
90%. Wow.
And Chinese-made components are increasingly being found in captured Russian weapons, like drones and tank fire control systems.
So physical evidence.
Yes. And the trade data shows a significant jump in China's exports of integrated circuits to Russia, and also indirectly through countries like Turkey, which also ramped up its IC exports to Russia.
Following the trail.
Uh-huh. There were even reports of Chinese companies shipping assault rifles and other potentially military items like body armor through Turkey and the UAE back in late 2022.
And now Zelensky himself has come out with a direct accusation, saying China is providing direct military assistance. That's a pretty significant escalation in what he's saying publicly.
It is a notable development, yes. On April 17th, President Zelensky publicly accused Beijing of providing direct military aid to Moscow for the first time.
What did he say specifically?
He specifically mentioned intelligence reports about shipments of gunpowder and artillery.
Gunpowder and artillery. That's pretty direct.
Very direct. And claimed that Chinese personnel are involved in weapons production within Russia, though he didn't give more details on that. He also mentioned his conversation with Xi Jinping, where she had apparently assured him that China would not sell or ship weapons to Russia.
Awkward. And this comes at a time when things were already tense after those captured Chinese mercenaries were announced.
Exactly. Zelensky claimed that a significant number, around 155 Chinese nationals, are fighting for the Russian army, and that this recruitment is happening, allegedly, with the knowledge of Chinese officials via social media.
And China's response.
China's foreign ministry spokesperson, Lin Jian, has strongly denied these claims, flat denial, stated that China has never provided lethal weapons to any party in the conflict and strictly controls the export of dual-use items.
Okay.
He also kind of threw it back, saying Ukraine knows Russia gets most of its weapon components from the U.S. and the West, dismissing the accusations as baseless and politically motivated, reiterated China wants peace talks.
So a lot of accusations flying around, direct denials. It's a really complex and murky situation with a lot of conflicting information.
It certainly is, and it highlights the delicate, maybe impossible balancing act China is trying to maintain on the world stage.
Finally, there was that mention of a U.S.-Ukraine minerals agreement. What's the story there? Just briefly.
Yeah, just a quick note. A memorandum of understanding has been signed between Ukraine and the U.S. regarding an agreement on minerals. President Trump indicated the formal signing is expected soon, like maybe April 24th.
And the goal?
His stated goal is to prioritize U.S. access to Ukraine's natural resources and critical minerals, which, could be a significant strategic move in the long run, thinking about supply chains and geopolitics.
Right. Resources are always key. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground today. It's clear that what's happening with tariffs and the war in Ukraine are all tangled up together.
Deeply interconnected.
And China's role in all of it is incredibly complicated with a lot of different angles.
Absolutely. While we did see a bit of a boost in the market based on hints of potentially softer tariff policies, the fact that there are no confirmed U.S.-China negotiations happening, and the ongoing brutal conflict in Eastern Europe mean that a lot of uncertainty remains. And the evidence we discussed really does suggest that China is providing significant, even if often indirect, and maybe increasingly direct
support for Russia's war efforts, despite their official denials.
Yeah, that seems to be the picture emerging from multiple sources.
It really makes you think, with the markets being so jumpy and all these wild, frankly, terrifying things happening on the global stage, what's the next big surprise going to be? What's that thing we're not even seeing yet that could totally change everything? It definitely feels like we need to keep a really close eye on all of this. Thanks for diving deep with me today.
Always good to talk it through.
And for you listening, keep those thinking caps on. There's a lot to keep track of.
Indeed. Stay curious and keep digging deeper.